see here. This meeting will be recorded, and we will post the recording of this meeting on the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission website in the next week or so. All right. This is a webinar, so all of you attendees are currently muted, but you will have two ways to ask questions and to raise points for discussion throughout this presentation. If you want to write your question, you can use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen to type a question. Moderators will monitor this section and will respond to the questions that come in there. If you would like to verbally ask your question, please use the raise hand feature, also located at the bottom of your screen. The facilitator will call on you and unmute you when we're ready for you to ask your question, but you will also need to make sure that you are unmuted on your end before everyone will be able to hear you. We ask that you hold on to your questions until the presentation is finished. We're going to have a 20 to 25-minute presentation, then we'll go into questions, and then we'll go into an open-ended discussion where we can go into details of the project and the process. All right, so that is housekeeping. So I want to thank all of you for coming to this public workshop today, where we'll be discussing a potential bicycle and pedestrian crossing over the Rivanna River in the vicinity of Riverview Park. The reason we are having this public workshop is because the Virginia Department of Transportation recently completed a feasibility study for this project. That feasibility study identified two potential crossings of the river in the study area. So today we're going to talk about those two crossing options, the two route options, and the process as a whole. Before we go any farther, I just want to introduce my fellow panelists who are going to be here to help answer questions and facilitate the discussion after the presentation. So first, myself, I'm Jessica Hirsch-Ballering. I am a transportation planner at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. We also have a representative here from VDOT. Chuck, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chuck Proctor. I'm the VDOT Culpeper District Planning Manager, and I work with my consultant at the request of the TJPDC and the community to do this study, and I hope it's going to address some of the questions that you guys might have and provide you with some information that we could possibly look to move forward with in the future.
Great, thank you, Chuck. We also have a representative here from Albemarle County. Dan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Dan Butch, Senior Planner of Transportation with Albemarle County.
Thanks, Dan. And we have a representative here from City of Charlottesville. Do you want to go ahead, Chris?
Hi, this is Chris Genzik. I'm the city's Parks and Greenways Coordinator. Also used to be with the Planning District, and I know this bridge has been on the dream phase for a long time. It's nice to have a little bit more technical information to look at and see if maybe it can go further sometime in the near future.
Great. Thank you, Chris. All right, Dominique, if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so this is tonight's agenda. First, we're going to talk about the project history. How did the project get to this point where we have a completed feasibility study? Then we'll go into the feasibility study purpose. What was the feasibility study setting out to accomplish? Then we'll move into the feasibility study results. As I said, the feasibility study identified two different route options for this crossing. So we'll talk about those. We'll go into the engineering details for those two different options. We'll talk about project connectivity and access. So how do those two different route options fit into the broader bicycle and pedestrian network? And then we'll talk about the cost estimates for both route options. Lastly, we'll talk about next steps. If this project is going to move forward, what might that look like and what timeline would that follow? Next slide. Sorry, Dominique, it doesn't look like it's moving to the next slide. All right. Great. So as we're going through this presentation, some questions for you to consider. What do you like about each of the location options? What do you not like? What do you like about each of the design options? And what do you not like? What concerns do you have about this project? What should staff investigate further? And who needs to be added to this conversation? These are the questions we will come back to in the open-ended discussion. This is going to guide that discussion. So you'll see these questions again after the presentation. Next slide. Right. So project history. The need for a bike and pedestrian crossing of the Rivanna River in the vicinity of Riverview Park to connect the Pantops region of Albemarle County to the Woolen Mills area and the city of Charlottesville has been identified in numerous planning documents, all of which were created with significant amounts of public engagement, both in person and by survey. I'm just going to pause for a moment because I'm seeing that there are some folks who are not seeing the slides. Sandy or Dominique, any ideas if that's a problem for everybody or just?
It's working okay for me. Why don't we do a raise your hand if you're having trouble? Maybe.
Okay, so go ahead and use the raise hand feature if you cannot see the slides. If you can see them, just sit tight.
I'm just seeing, it looks like it's just one person.
Okay.
So just a reminder that the recording will be posted on the website, so you can go back and look at it later, and the visual should be working then.
All right. Apologies to that one person. Hopefully you can get it sorted out, but we're going to continue. So on the right of the slide, you can see all the different plans that have talked about this potential crossing. So a crossing in this area was identified as the #1 project in the Pantops master plan. It was identified as a tier 1 project in the Jefferson area bicycle and pedestrian plan. So that was the highest level of priority. It was identified as a near-term recommendation in the city of Charlottesville bicycle and pedestrian master plan, so something that should happen soon. Identified in the transportation chapter of the Albemarle County comprehensive plan, and identified as part of the livability project, which was a joint effort by the planning commissions of the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. Next slide. Okay. So all of those plans had some very similar themes in regards to this crossing, or this potential crossing. So the plans and public presentations on this potential crossing noted that the Rivanna River is a physical barrier to regional mobility, a great asset to our community, beautiful, but still a physical barrier. The Pantops area is projected to have significant residential and economic growth in the coming years, and a substantial economic development project is underway in Woolen Mills. So there is growth on both sides of this project area, on both sides of the river. Currently, there are bike and pedestrian shared use paths on both the east and west sides of the Rivanna River with limited connections between them. And the Pantops master plan and the Jefferson area bicycle and pedestrian plan indicate future on-street bike facilities on Peter Jefferson Parkway and State Farm Boulevard. So while there might not be a ton of bike facilities on the east side of the project area right now, there is a lot planned for that area. Next slide. Okay. So one of the exciting things about this project is you might think of it, being near Riverview Park. It sounds like a recreational amenity, which it would be, but this would also serve commuter transportation needs. So studies indicate that many Pantops residents work in downtown Charlottesville, and a number of Charlottesville city residents work in the Pantops area. And many of those people are interested in commuting by bike or on foot for a variety of reasons. So on the right hand of the slide in this map, this is taken from the Pantops master plan. So this area circumscribed by the dotted line is the Pantops area. The orange circle indicates our study area, the area we were considering for the potential crossing of the river. The red dots show the general employment locations of commuters from Pantops. So people traveling out of Pantops going to work at the red dots. And the blue dots show general residence locations of commuters to Pantops. So people live at the blue dots and all those people commute into the Pantops area. So this map shows that there are a number of people who live and work who live a bikeable, walkable distance from their place of employment. So this crossing could help them get to work on a regular basis. Next slide. So all of that history, we get to 2019, and staff from the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and the TJPDC requested VDOT's Transportation Mobility and Planning Division through Chuck to investigate the feasibility of such a crossing. Next slide. Okay, and that feasibility study got underway, and it was discussed at joint meetings of the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County on June 6th, 2019, and again on September 9th, 2019. And at that September 9th, 2019 meeting, city and county staff collaborated on a presentation for elected officials. And all of that can be summarized by saying that staff and elected officials have repeatedly heard the community voice a desire and need for a river crossing in this area. Next slide. All right, moving on to the feasibility study purpose. Next slide. Okay, so remember the feasibility study was done at the request of City of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and TJPDC staff. It was completed at VDOT's expense by a contracted engineering, planning, and design firm, VHB. A memo of the feasibility study results is publicly available. It is on the TJPDC Bike and Ped Transportation Planning website. We're going to go over those results next, but I just wanted to let you know if you wanted to read the memo for yourself, if you wanted to look into any more details, that is available to you. Next slide. So what did VDOT ask the consultants to do for this feasibility study? They had three main goals. First, to determine whether a bridge in the study area was possible from an engineering perspective. That was a question that we had. We didn't even know if it was possible. So looking at the map on the right, you can see the study area that was identified, and it's kind of bounded by Free Bridge to the north and I-64 to the south. And as we said, the consultants did identify two crossings, two route options that were possible from an engineering standpoint. They developed a conceptual plan for both of those route options, which was their second goal. And their third goal was to develop a planning level engineer's cost estimate for that conceptual plan. So they did the conceptual plan and the cost estimate for both of those route options. Next slide. And now we can move into the feasibility study results. Next slide. All right, so these are the two route options that were identified by the feasibility study. The first option is in orange, and that would go on the west side from the intersection of Chesapeake Street and Riverside Avenue at Riverview Park, across the Rivanna River as a single truss bridge, and then continue up the slope as a shared use path to the intersection of Pantops Drive and State Farm Boulevard. The other option was a little bit further south. It would begin at the east end of East Market Street, and it would be an arch bridge made of two components or two pieces going across the river. The first piece would go from the end of East Market Street to the middle of the sediment island in the middle of the Rivanna River. The second piece would continue across the Rivanna River, and then like the other option, it would continue up the slope as a shared use path to the same end point as option one at the intersection of Pantops Drive and State Farm Boulevard. Okay, next slide. So here's a better way to visualize what those two options might look like. So this is option one. This is the one that would have started at Chesapeake or that would start at Chesapeake and Riverside. So what you're seeing in this picture is you are looking south. Riverview Park is in the bottom right-hand corner, and the bridge begins on the right side of the picture at Chesapeake and Riverside, continues as a single piece across the river, and then would continue up the slope as a shared use path. The picture on the right-hand side is just a drawing of what that bridge might look like from a user's perspective. Next slide. All right, and this is what option two might look like. So remember that was going to be a two-piece bridge, one piece starting at so this picture is looking at the Rivanna River looking north. There's the sediment island in the middle On the left-hand side, you can see the railroad tracks, and you can see East Market coming down towards the railroad tracks, and that's where the bridge would begin. It would continue across that first bit of the Rivanna River. There would be a pier in the middle of the sediment island connecting the two spans of the bridge, and then the second span would continue across the river, and the shared use path would continue up the slope to that same endpoint as for option number 1. Next slide. Okay, so here are some more engineering details on these two. So I'm going to go one by one, and then you can kind of compare them. So option 1, the one beginning at Chesapeake and Riverside, was a single truss bridge, and that single component would be 325 feet long. The bridge span would have a clearance of 40 feet over normal river height and 15 feet over the floodplain. The bridge and path in their entirety would maintain a grade of 5% or less. Moving over to option 2, the one that would begin at East Market Street, that was an arch bridge with a pier in the mid-river sediment island. Each of the two spans would be 296 feet long. The first span was the one that was closest to the river, and that one would have a clearance of 5 feet over normal river height and only 1 foot over the floodplain. The bridge and the path would mostly maintain a grade of 5% or less, and that 5% grade. So the steeper the grade, the higher that number, the more difficult it is to pedal or walk up that path. So that bridge and path would mostly maintain a grade of 5% or less, but 150 feet of that path would have a grade of 6.5%. So a small portion would be a little bit steeper. Now, the consultants expected that option 1 would be the easier of the two options to construct, simply because of the absence of in-river construction. But I will caveat that by saying that that's an expectation that they have, that's a guess that they have, it's not for certain. There's a lot of other components that haven't been investigated yet to determine which one would actually be easiest. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we're looking at how do each of these route options fit into the larger bicycle and pedestrian network. So we are looking at a map from the Jefferson Area Bike and Ped Plan. In pink, you can see all the sidewalk infrastructure. In yellow, you can see all the bicycle infrastructure. And that big black circle identifies the study area for this project. To further orient you, that blue line, that's the Rivanna River. And let's see, you can see a couple of things to point out. In the middle of that black circle, there is a solid pink purple line. That is Chesapeake Street. And as you can see from the map, there is continuous sidewalk infrastructure, at least on one side of Chesapeake, for the entirety of the study area. Just a little bit below that, you can see some dots of pink purple. That is East Market Street, and that indicates that there is some intermittent sidewalk infrastructure on East Market Street right now, but it is not complete. Another thing worth pointing out is just how close together these two options are. They are not geographically distant, they are very close, and they are also connected. Riverside Avenue connects Chesapeake to East Market Street. So yeah, just pointing out that those are very close together. All right, so that kind of looks at the big picture. Next, we'll move to the next slide. And we'll look at the west side of the project area, the west side of the Rivanna River. So remember, one option began at Chesapeake and Riverside. That one connects to the broader bike and ped network with a direct connection to the Rivanna Trail, that path, that shared use path that goes along the river, starting at Riverview Park, very popular. Riverview Park's parking lot, and Chesapeake Street, which leads to downtown Charlottesville. Option 2 is also well connected. It provides a direct connection to the Woolen Mills Economic Development Site, and East Market Street, like Chesapeake, leads straight into downtown Charlottesville. Now, like I pointed out on the last side, Chesapeake has continuous sidewalk on the north side. East Market Street does not have complete sidewalk the entire way. Additionally, East Market Street has a constrained 20-foot cross section. So there's a portion of that street that is only 20 feet wide, which is basically the minimum you need for motor vehicles. And that would not allow for separate pedestrian facilities. Additionally, there's limited parking availability along East Market Street for recreational users. Okay, next slide. And now we're looking at the east side of the project area, the east side of the Rivanna River. So let's look at the picture first. Let's remember that both route options ended up at the same point on the east side of the project. What you're looking at here is the intersection of Peter Jefferson Parkway and State Farm Boulevard facing southeast toward the hospital. What is envisioned here by the consultants is a trailhead. There would be parking and there would be some sort of shade structure and other trailhead-like amenities at that area, including signage. Recreational users would be able to access the bridge from this Pantops area where the dedicated trailhead is planned, and that has the potential to alleviate parking and access issues at Riverview Park, which is already a busy parking lot, and in the surrounding neighborhood. A reminder that the Pantops master plan and the Jefferson area bicycle and pedestrian plan indicate future on-street bike facilities on Peter Jefferson Parkway and State Farm Boulevard. And there's already the existing Old Mills Trail, some of which is paved, some of which is crushed gravel. All right, that's that slide. Next slide. Okay, and now onto the cost estimates. So option one, the one starting from Chesapeake and Riverside, came in a little bit cheaper at $11,333,000 plus contingencies. Contingencies just means the cost of all the things that it takes to make such a path and crossing might change over time. So contingencies. Option two, the one beginning at the end of East Market, came in at about $15,360,000 plus or minus contingencies. For both of those options, remember they both end at the same place on the east side of the project. That would require a right-of-way purchase from State Farm and Presidio Development. If that was negotiated for an easement and they didn't need to purchase anything as part of this, the overall cost of both projects would go down. All right, next slide. All right, and now we're going to talk about next steps. Next slide. Okay, so this is a pretty meaty slide where we're going to think about what if this project is to move forward, what would that look like? So as this webinar ends, we will be beginning the first blue box on the left, reviewing feedback from this meeting and from online comments and phone calls. We will compile all of that feedback at the TJPDC, and then we will share it with committees that will include the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County staff and elected officials. That process I anticipate will take a couple of months, just as we're coming into the holidays. Committee meetings happen every other month. So that's kind of the timeline we're working with there. Ongoing, kind of throughout the whole process up to this point and moving on, is staff need to identify funding opportunities. There's a lot of different possibilities for funding a project like this. And we're always looking into what might be the best option for this particular project, if it's something that we want to move forward, that everyone wants to move forward. Some of those opportunities include smart scale, transportation alternatives, and revenue sharing. There are others, and we have yet to identify them. So any one of those funding opportunities would be a possibility. They'd be something worth looking into. The one I'm most familiar with is smart scale. So that's the one I've decided to use as an example for the rest of this slide. So if smart scale was identified as the appropriate funding opportunity, we would need to next identify initial support for a funding application from the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County staff and elected officials. And that would need to happen in the spring of 2021. At that point, we would need to determine which of the alignments, which of those route options were the one that we wanted to move forward with. By spring of 2022, that would be when we could actually submit a funding application for smart scale. That would require a resolution by elected officials from the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. And that would happen in public meetings. So if we submit that funding application and it is awarded, we move into the next box. So if awarded, that's when we would move into the design phase. So everything we've talked about so far, all of these results from the feasibility study, we're really just looking at what is possible and what might it look like in these possible places The design phase would be when we actually get into the nitty gritty of, okay, really, what would it look like? And what tiny little details do we need to pay attention to? That's when we would seek a lot of public input on design to make sure that it meets the entire community's needs. It needs to be functional, yes, but it also should be aesthetically pleasing, and it should fit into the environment in a way that everyone is as happy with as possible. And that would happen at the earliest spring of 2023. And then at the absolute earliest, we're looking at construction happening spring of 2024. But all of this is, potential, possible. We are way back at the very beginning of the set of next steps. And at any point along this slide, we could pause or reconsider or look at something else. So that's that. Next slide. All right, so that really concludes my presentation, and I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. I am not going to be the only one answering questions, so Chuck, Chris, Dan, this is time for you guys to unmute yourselves. I'm going to read the questions that have popped up in the Q&A. If you've typed your questions into the chat and you want us to answer them in this meeting, please retype them into the Q&A, because that's the only place I'm going to be looking for questions here. All right. Okay, so first question from Bill, where did the name Sediment Island come from? Is it descriptive? The last time I was on it, it seemed very rocky. Anyone else want to take this? I think it's really just a descriptive term that the consultants were using, but Chuck, can you verify? Chuck, you're still muted.
All right, can you hear?
Oops. You look like you're unmuted, Chuck. Why don't you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes. It was identified as it's not an island, it was just an area where sediment has accumulated downstream through that portion of the river, downstream of where the old dam used to be.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Julia asks, are either of these options easier to accommodate ADA? Initially, I would say, the one with the consistent 5% or less grade would likely be easier to accommodate ADA, but Chuck, did you want to add anything to that answer?
The reason it's basically not necessarily the bridge, it's the length of the trail. With the Chesapeake crossing, there's more distance, so the grade can be flatter. With the crossing at Woolen Mills, there's not as much distance from the end of the bridge up to the tie down point at where the trailhead is up at State Farm. And that's really the difference. They're both following similar alignments, going up that swale between State Farm and the Presidio property, mainly on the west side, to try to stay out of the drainage area.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Supervisor Price asks, both options appear to go through the current State Farm building. That's probably just my drawing. Chuck, can you confirm that nothing goes through the State Farm building? I just drew a straight line.
Yeah, neither one of them go through the State Farm building. They actually don't even affect the parking area either. They go up around the outside. It's mostly on the State Farm property, but it's in that down the slope a little ways from the parking lot, and it basically works its way up the grade as it goes up the hill towards State Farm and the trailhead.
So I'll just add, Donna, that I drew a straight line on that map, but there is a lot of switchback style design to that shared use path that I couldn't accurately represent by drawing on a computer. So Chuck, do we have like more specific drawings of exactly where
There
the-
should be in the study an alignment of where that trail, how that trail runs for both scenarios. I think it's, once it gets around the corner, it's pretty close to the same alignment. It's just that you're able to make up some grade on the Chesapeake crossing earlier as you're coming parallel to the river before you turn the corner and go up towards the trailhead.
Great. We'll be sure to include a clear picture of that on our website when we post this recording. So Dominique, make note that I promised to do that. Okay. The grades of the bridge will meet ADA requirements is another question. Chuck, did you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, we're gonna, if those, that's one of the criteria for the project. So yes, it does meet ADA requirements. And there's actually an opportunity to have an overlook area with the Woolen Mills crossing in the center as we move forward, but we'll have to, as we move forward, we can look at that more closely.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, and just to add on to that for folks, you can't usually get transportation funding unless it meets ADA requirements, so that would be included. All right, where will parking be on the Albemarle side? Chuck, are you more informed on that?
You'd have to ask Kevin or Butch or Dan Butch on that one, because I'm not sure. I was mainly focused on the trail and the crossing, not necessarily the parking issue. I know on the Woolen Mills side, there's parking at Woolen Mills. There's limited parking at the Riverside Park. But on the Pantop side, I'm not sure, other than parking at one of those surrounding areas, surrounding to the intersection.
Right. I'll just go off of what Chuck said there. This definitely is an issue of vehicle access to this to the Rivanna River, Old Mills Trail, and any potential future bridge. The study, the scope of this study, obviously, is for bike and pedestrian connectivity here, but it's definitely something that we want to look into and has yet to be identified.
So, but Dan, you would say that, I mean, that was, it was in the feasibility study that parking should be included. Can you confirm that it would be possible?
Sorry, what's that?
Can you confirm that it would be possible to include parking on the Albemarle County side?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are working with Parks and Recreation on this as well. But, you know, negotiations for any trailhead is off a bit still, but it's definitely on the radar.
Thank you. The next question is from Lee. Why is option 2 lower to the river? Chuck, do you have a good answer for that?
I mean, they were working off the grades that were the existing grades at the road elevation on the Riverside Park, on the Woolen Mill side of the river. So that's where our starting point is. And that we went straight across from there. Why it's lower to the river, I'm not sure if the distance across for the floodplain is narrower at that point. Because you are downstream from the Chesapeake location, but from the hydraulic standpoint, I'm not quite sure. They're not at the same elevation, or they're real, because the hydraulic elevations are different. The two, I'm not sure of the specifics. I'd have to get into the details of the study.
Okay.
Why? But I know that we had a fixed point that we started out with at Woolen Mills, at that roadway at Woolen Mills.
So Chuck, just to summarize, it sounds like we are aware that there is an elevation difference between the end of East Market and Chesapeake and Riverside, with Chesapeake and Riverside being higher, which accounts for at least part of that difference in distance to the river. But there might be more to that.
I think so, but I'm not positive. I don't know, because I haven't gotten into the details of the I know that was one of the points that we had fixed. And the difference between those 2 points, that part I don't know. I mean, Riverside Park is actually part of the floodplain. So that's why we had to start at Chesapeake, because otherwise the trailhead would have been in the floodplain.
Thank you, Chuck. The next question is from Jenny. Though East Market has limited pedestrian accessibility, aren't there other connections from the south to the new Woolen Mills complex? That sounds like a question for Chris. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit more about the pedestrian connections south of option 2? Chris, you're currently muted, just so you know. Chris, I'm going to give you another second.
Okay, am I here?
You are here. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, yeah, certainly the Woolen Mills redevelopment and the new bridge over Moores Creek and what we're working on trails along Moores Creek helps with that connection to the south, kind of down towards Route 20. With the Woolen Mills development in concert with the county, the city and county have been looking at how to use Broadway, East Market, which streets are going to be best for a bike ped connection back into downtown, and then those sorts of things are being looked at now on the East Market Street end of things. And the very end of East Market, while it's narrow, is extremely low traffic. So I think even though you land in a place that doesn't necessarily have sidewalks today, it's still a reasonably pleasant place to walk or bike if you had to. But we would look at those connections if this project went forward.
Great. Thank you for that answer, Chris. Rita just asked for us to repeat where the parking would be for the trailhead. As we said, there has been nothing determined as of yet. It is expected that parking should be included, and county staff are working on that. How can people provide comments after tonight? So you can go to the Rivanna Urban Corridor Plan. Sandy, if you want to pop in and give the actual website address and maybe include that in the chat. That's where you will be able to find the recording, the map that I promised, and a link for comments. You can also email me, and I will include my email address along with our other panelists' email addresses at the end of this presentation.
Yeah, our website just changed, so I'm double checking the address before I share it, but it is tjpdc.org. It's probably the easiest way to go to it if you go to the Our Work link at the top. And then under community, you would click on area plans, and then there's a Urban Rivanna River Corridor plan. So you can click it that way, and I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandy. Peter asks, do we have handy the cost without land acquisition? No, we don't, but it exists in the feasibility study. All of the costs are broken down, and there are lovely spreadsheets in there that you can check out. All right, will there be any funding required from the city or the county to assist? Possibly, possibly not. It depends on which of the funding opportunities is pursued, if any are pursued. Smart Scale would not require any funding, as far as I understand it. Something like revenue sharing would require that. Chuck, did you want to add anything to that? We do have a lot of questions, though.
That's correct. There's not any match or anything with Smart Scale. There are with the other funding requirements. It doesn't mean you may not want to participate. It just means you don't have to. With the cost the way they are, it may be a good opportunity to participate to make the project more the cost benefit better, so it scores better in Smart Scale. But that's something that the public, the city and the county would have to decide how they wanted to do that part of it.
Great, thank you, Chuck. The next question is, what is the present right-of-way status of Old Mill Trail? Dan, I believe that's a question for you.
Just from working with Parks and Rec, I'm just familiar that it's a current county trail system on a county-owned parcel. But for VDOT with access in the right-of-way, getting to that, I'm sure the county would be really willing to work with VDOT with that.
Thank you, Dan. Anne has a question about, please explain the 40 feet above water level and 1 foot over the floodplain. Do we mean that in the full flood, the bottom of the southern bridge would be closer to the water? I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit, that Chuck, did you want to say any more briefly on this? I think that this has come up a couple of times. Go ahead.
That's correct. I mean, when they look at the 100-year floodplain, it gives you an elevation, and depending on your structure, the southern bridge is much longer, and the structure is, because of the design, it is the beams or the trusses that span those sides are larger. So that's going to put it at a lower elevation to start out with from the bottom of the structure. So yeah, it is going to be closer. They design it so that it's going to clear it, and that's what the requirements are.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Rebecca notes that sediment refers to soil, including gravel and rock, that is moved by water or wind. So thank you for that. Jim writes, I had understood that 3 sites would be considered. Was there any consideration of the old dam abutment? Seems like a similar span to option 1, but without the approval process of option 2. So little history that wasn't included in the presentation is that the consultants had identified a couple of extra sites in addition to those 2. I believe it was 6 of them. They brought those 6 options to a staff committee, and that staff committee, based on a number of factors, helped narrow it down to the 2 that were presented to you today. Right. Rob, did anyone want to add anything to that? Chris or Dan? All right, we'll move on. I'm only going to take a few more questions because I do want to give us time to move into a little bit of open discussion. You can follow up with additional questions via email that I'd be happy to respond to. You can also email city, county, or VDOT staff. All right, so how does the bridge trail locations interact with the parking lots at State Farm? Is there a plan that shows this in more detail? So that is the map that we described, that I had said I would put on our website, that will give a little bit more detail than the simplified drawing that I included in this presentation. Were there river crossing options considered in locations north of these locations closer to Freebridge? So within the study area, yes, like I said, there were those 6 options that the consultants first came up with. Staff narrowed it down to these 2 for a variety of reasons. There were also, I know that some people have, in responding or asking questions about this project, have asked about crossings up at from Dardentow and Penn Park. And those are projects that have also been prioritized in other plans, but have not been as consistently prioritized as this one. And this river crossing also has that added commute potential that the other more northerly options wouldn't. Right, and let's see, one more. Is it anticipated that the trail on the opposite side of Riverview would be paved? Currently it's gravel. Dan, I think that's a question for you. The Old Mills Trail on the other side of on the east side of Rivanna River, is there any plan to pave that?
It's on the priorities with Transportation, Parks and Rec for a potential upgrade to a shared use path. Again, that's a priority future, and we could see how that ties in with this project for future connectivity and improvement.
Great, thank you, Dan. We still have quite a few questions open. but I do want to move into some open discussion. If you would like to say anything, Dominique, why don't you go ahead and move us to the next slide? If you would like to respond to any of these questions, I encourage you to use the raise hand feature. And what we will do is unmute you, and then you can say whatever you have to say. All right. While we wait for people to think if there's anything they want to say, we'll continue answering questions. Mary Wolf asked, how does option 1 meet grade at Chesapeake? Chuck, you can answer this in a little more detail, but I believe it's just, it would just, the bridge would begin right from the street level. Is that correct?
Correct. It's basically based on that elevation of the road at that point. That's what we use for our starting point.
Thank you. So Julia Williams, I just allowed you to talk. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks. I feel like I have a lot of questions. So I was curious about, will this get further developed for both options, or are you, I'm curious what the next steps, because I feel like I couldn't even begin to evaluate. I could begin to evaluate, but I don't have enough to really evaluate. Like the parking is an important part, I think. Mm-hmm. And other features are important. So I know you don't want to do a full design, but is there more development of these options before a final decision is you know, the city or this group makes a decision?
Yeah, so just to clarify, this group will not be making a decision. Dominique, if you wouldn't mind popping back over to the next steps slide. The public feedback that we gather today and that we gather through comments is, like I said, going to be shared with staff and elected officials. And really it comes down to both of those groups weighing the feedback and weighing the information they have and deciding if they want to proceed forward with any of the identified funding opportunities. And that is the point where some decision would need to be made. Now, perhaps there could be some decision would need to be made about which of the two route options. There would probably be some limited work done to investigate each of those options further, just because there's probably some like geology stuff we need to look into a little bit further, or other things like that. Some limited work would be done, but no, it wouldn't be a more detailed design. That work would happen after funding had been awarded, if it gets awarded, and that design work would be much more detailed then. But yeah, great question.
So then, I don't know if you can still hear me, but so the question about parking, mm-hmm. Yeah, you said, yes, it has to be addressed, but how are we going to hear how do we begin to understand that? Or is it really, I guess I'm a little confused about what happens with all the questions we posed today.
All the questions you post today will be gathered together and shared with staff and elected officials. Like I said, those are the folks who are going to make that call about whether or not to proceed. If there's a lot of questions, and there definitely seem to be, we can address some of those on our website. That would probably be the most likely scenario.
So what I guess I'm asking is how are the answers shared? I mean, so parking will be addressed, right? At some point on the yes. County side. So it'll be either yes, there's parking, or no, there'll be no parking. So how do we get those answers?
So what I'm hearing from our county representative is that, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, yes, parking would be included. We do not know exactly where, and we do not know exactly how many spaces would be included, but parking would be included in the trailhead design at the on the eastern side of the project.
Hey Jessica.
Yeah, Sandy.
If I can jump in, Tim Padalino, who is with Albemarle County, he made a response on the chat that might be good for everybody else to hear. If you want to, if he's okay sharing that with the group.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read that, Tim. Thank you so much. Tim says, can I suggest that vehicular access and parking is an issue that is broader and transcends this bridge feasibility study? It's an important consideration for the planning and design of the potential bridge project, but it's been a separate issue from this bridge. I think that's a good point, that parking and access in our community is a big deal. It's going to be a big deal with any project, including this one. And as much as I can tell you is that we plan to include that parking is included in the design, although exactly where and how much has not yet been determined. All right, thank you so much, Julie, for your questions. I would like to, I saw Lee Condor's hand next, so I'm going to allow him to talk. Lee, you'll have to unmute yourself before you can speak.
Oh, okay, yeah, my concern, primary concern is the cost of it. I mean, it's a great idea, but yeah, 11 to 15 million dollars is a lot of money. I went down and looked at Riverview Park today, and the river, of course, was very high today because of all the rain. It looks to me like it'd be fairly simple to cross right at Riverview Park to Old Mill Trail, a single span truss type bridge. And then Old Mill Trail could be connected to the trailhead at the intersection of State Farm Boulevard and Peter Jefferson Boulevard, which would hopefully reduce the right-of-way aspect of it somewhat. And it would be, as direct a route as option one would anyway, but it would utilize some of the existing structure there. I just a thought about, a possible way to reduce the cost somewhat, maybe cut it in half or so.
Well, thank you so much for your comments, Lee. We'll go ahead and pass those along. Chuck, you can pass those along to the consultants. All right. The next person I saw hand raised, Anthony. Anthony, I've allowed you to speak, so if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, I had two questions. First is this, how much is this going to be used for commuter versus just a destination to explore both sides of the river? And any understanding of that, for example, if it's not commuter driven, did you consider a pedestrian bridge and no bike access similar to what they already have at the Woolen Mills, what they built last year? And then the second question is, if it's used for commuting to go downtown, how is that going to impact the neighborhood, specifically Chesapeake Street or Market? I mean, Market's narrow, Chesapeake Street is extremely hilly, but also not necessarily bike friendly at this point.
Chris, I hear a lot of noise on your end. Is that because you want to answer the question?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I think, in a broader city sense, the more people who bike and walk in, the less people that need to use Freebridge with cars, that need to park, let's say downtown, or let's say at the new Willow Tree place at Woolen Mills or other places like that. In terms of the split recreational transportation, I mean, I'm just trying to envision people who would drive down there just to walk out on the bridge and look at the river. I don't foresee that as a huge thing, but we do need to plan for it. But in terms of the impact to Market, Chesapeake, or even Broadway, it would be people on bikes and walking instead of cars. So I'm not sure what the impact, if it would be a noticeable impact traffic, it would be bikes or people on foot.
And if bikes become electric bikes, and how do you prevent this from being pretty heavy in terms of taking a residential area and getting commuters that are on mopeds, et cetera, going across everything?
That's a question we're dealing with on all of our trails at the moment. Electric bikes is one thing. Mopeds are a totally different thing, and we're looking at that on a number of trails and bridges around town. There's pros and cons to both, but at the moment, this would not be for mopeds, as most things. That's an actual motorized. Electric's a new thing that we're trying to get a hold of.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Anthony, for your questions. So we've actually just about reached our 7 o'clock hour. I'm going to continue to take comments and questions for a few more minutes. If anyone needs to leave, of course, you're free to go. If you've put a question into the Q&A box and I haven't responded, or we haven't responded to it yet, please do follow up with us via email. We will respond to you as quickly as possible. I am very appreciative of all of your time, and I'm very appreciative of how invested people are in learning more about this project and offering their opinions. So next, Dana Schroeder, I'm unmuting you if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question or state your comment.
Great. I can try to be quick. I'm excited about the prospect of a pedestrian bridge in either location, as long as the concerns that we've talked about a lot around parking are able to get addressed. I think I like the location of the Riverview Park, like option 1 crossing, a little bit more. It seems like it would serve like a broader neighborhood. Like, I mean, I guess it's all close together, but I like that location. I like that design. It ends up higher above the water level. It seems like it might be less expensive and more accessible. So that would be, I guess, my feedback.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. Those were really great comments. All right, Kevin Huff, I have unmuted you if you would like to go ahead and state your comment or ask your question.
Hi, it's actually Sarah Dexter. I live at the foot of the proposed option 1 bridge, right at the base of Chesapeake, where it starts into the park. And so I have a very good bird's eye view out my kitchen window of all the traffic in and out. So my concern is about parking, which I know has been mentioned, but the area that number 1 option is shown at is also being discussed for a boat ramp. And in general, the neighborhood hasn't been in favor of a parking area added there. And it was extremely busy this summer. And I think that I'd like to see, you said who else needs to be involved. I'd like to see coordination with the city around that boat ramp concept that's being discussed, and the parking lot that was, potentially going to be considered in that field that is empty right now in the neighborhood. It would really change the nature of our neighborhood streets right there, as it did this summer, just with, not having the boat shuttle operating for all the people inner tubing because all the city, pools were closed. But even though that hopefully won't be the case next summer, then there will be other the river has gotten increasingly more popular over the last few years. So I think there will continue to be traffic, and the parking issue just can't be ignored or, underestimated. That's one point. The other question I had was about lighting. Is it anticipated that these bridges would be lighted? Given that it's right outside my bedroom windows, I'm, curious about that, at least option 1.
Great. Well, thank you for those comments and questions. Chris, did you want to respond?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely have our eyes on Riverview for COVID was one thing. We saw that. Parking in general, as that's a very popular park, is another thing. And we are looking at ways to balance overuse or very popularity stuff without paving all the green space. I think there's going to be at least a neighborhood meeting this winter to talk about that boat ramp idea, the former sewer pump area, to make sure that if anything's done there, that everybody's in agreement with what to do. I don't think any decisions have been made in terms of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're aware that there's parking limits, but also particularly your view out the window there, what that green space is that used to be the sewer plant pump station. We got to be real careful with what we do there. Real quick thing on lighting. I have seen low light bridges before. There's a couple in Richmond where the lights are built into the walls and things, so they're not really bright. That said, we typically don't light shared use trails, but if this was a commuter path, there may be need for some light. If that was decided that it would need to be lit, we would want to make sure it's done very discreetly. So that, to Jessica's point, would be a design detail if it goes forward to make sure that if there is lighting, it's done in a respectful way. So, well commented there.
Sorry, I forgot I muted myself, everyone. Ron Brownfield, I'm giving you the option to ask your question or state your comment.
Yeah, I agree with Julia. By the way, hi, Julia, on Brownfield. But anyways, I'd like to study both options. But I guess I'm leaning towards option one. I think the park area, or Riverside Park, is a good place to have one of the terminations. That's it. That's my comment.
Great. Thank you so much, Ron. Mary Wolf, would you like to state your question or comment?
Hi. I just wanted to comment on the bridge location for option 2 at the woolen mill on Market Street. I live at the end of Market Street right there, and just have a lot of concerns about the additional bike and pedestrian traffic that the bridge would bring, in addition to the already increased car traffic that we have. And we've even with the mill not really fully open, we've seen quite a bit more traffic, and it's essentially one way, and it just feels very dangerous, particularly at night. And now that it's getting darker earlier, and there's a lot more nighttime traffic going to the mill. So that concerns me. And I also wanted to just bring up a concern for, the visual impact of a bridge in that location, and just make sure that that's carefully considered if this option were to go forward. It's a very picturesque section of the river, and also that sort of juncture is just a really beautiful sort of historic pocket in the woolen mills, and just make sure all of that is carefully preserved if a bridge were in this location. And then I also just wanted to touch a little bit on the bike path around State Farm, and just looking through the feasibility study, it looked like there's a lot of cut and fill to get basically a 16 or 18 feet of level width along steep slopes, and looks like there'll be a need for retaining walls and such. And just wanted to wonder if something like the Monticello Trail through there might be considered, rather than the disturbance that cutting into the slope would create.
I think we'll hand that question off partly to Chuck if you wanted to talk more about the slope options, and then also after that to Chris to talk more about, really broadly. It sounds like Mary's concerns are not just about this project, but about woolen mills in general, and the development that's happening there, if you wanted to speak to that. So first Chuck and then Chris.
Yeah, regarding the trail up the grade, we're trying to meet ADA requirements. As long as it meets ADA requirements, we can go with a different kind of surface. It's not as intrusive, but we'd have to work with the topography as best we can to make something like that work. And that's what we're trying to do as much as possible. But I mean, until we get into the more design aspects of the trail itself, I really don't know at this point. So that moving forward, once we've figured out which option we want to go to, and when we start moving forward, we can have that discussion at that time.
Thanks, Chuck.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris. Chris, do we still have you there?
Yeah, I'm here. What was the question? The East
Mary,
Market?
yeah, Mary was talking about just increased traffic in the Woolen Mills area in general because of the economic development there. I'm not sure that we want to get too deep into it, as that seems like a
Right, that
yeah.
was just a concern that I wanted to express, that we've been, with there's, well, just because of everything going on with people are outdoors more, there's a lot more bikes and pedestrians on the street now. And, with the addition of cars, it's starting to feel a little more dangerous and tighter. And so just concerns about, bringing more of that in with the automobile traffic and just a lot of congestion.
Yeah, and I guess I would repeat that, the bike ped piece, at least they're moderately quieter and safer than cars coming through. But like you mentioned, with Woolen Mills now being, there's a restaurant there and there's other things that, stay open after hours. I live in Belmont, and we had that issue with the restaurants opening up in downtown Belmont. Suddenly, 2 a.m, there's people kind of gathering, and that the people who live next door to those restaurants started having.
It's less concern about bringing the additional bikes and people. It's just more the concern about the safety of having that with cars, because cars drive very quickly through there at night, and you really have to watch out.
Yeah, and I think we'll coordinate that with, the interesting thing is the end of Market County. The Woolen Mills people are supposed to be using Broadway, at least for commuting, but particularly how the public interacts with the coffee shop, I guess there's a beer place that's going to be there. These are all things that we would need to coordinate among multiple departments and with the neighborhood and the neighbors. So.
Right, and the speed of cars is a big issue.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary, for your comments, and thanks, Chris and Chuck.
Thank you.
I see 3 more hands raised. We're going to work through those 3, and then we're going to call the meeting. Again, thank you, everyone. Thanks for sticking around past the 7 o'clock mark. So Peter, then Jim, then Emily. So Peter, go ahead.
Thanks, Jessica. Man, this meeting is so good. Like any designer, it's just completely filling up their notepad, and any of the sort of design type suggestions I might have had have been raised by the other people on the call. I wanted to ask a little bit about process. And that is that I know that all the panelists and Chuck among them are big advocates of bringing in lots of community information at the front end of the process as much as possible. So there were 2 things that I've heard mentioned that I'm wondering where you guys think fit into the process. Number 1 would be having like an advisory committee that would perhaps have representatives from Woolen Mills, the Pantop CAC, RCA, and others that have wisdom that's gonna help the process. And is that like after you get your green light from the county to proceed? I would recommend getting as much info as possible before talking to the board and to city council, because they're going to have these same questions, and the more we can like come with answers to those questions, I think the more likely we are to have success. Plus those folks are like your ambassadors that'll help overall make the project successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I'll just briefly mention that the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission is revising its smart scale application processes. So if we were to proceed forward with a funding application for this project, then, and that funding application was going to go through smart scale, we would be following that new process, which very well could include the creation of some advisory committee to work through a lot of these questions even before we get to the design phase. Just to briefly answer your question, Peter. All right, going ahead to Jim. You're free to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So probably more of a comment than any questions. This is not just about a bridge. This is about placemaking, and you're looking at a choice between making place at Riverview Park or making place at the end of Woolen Mills. And this community has basically turned its back on the river for quite some time, and that's now beginning to evolve and change. So with regard to my earlier comment about the park, is that the bridge is not just a simple engineering span trying to connect point A to point B, and that it's, you've got the kayaking, you have people using the park. There's a whole broader consideration to this than just the span. So I would just suggest that this needs to be looked at much more holistically than simply focusing on just figuring out which span to park in here. So yeah, anyway, that's all I have to say for the moment, but thanks.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that big picture comment. I appreciate that. And oh, go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to continue off what Jim said and just inform everybody that this study has been with Albemarle County staff in conversation and with the staff that's working on the Rivanna River Corridor Plan with the TJPDC. And so, open communication with that. And I have not been involved with the corridor plan, but, we're trying to keep all aspects communicated there. And, but also that this is a designated scenic river. And so we want to keep these factors in, outside of transportation for this study, we want to look into all these aspects for this as well.
Great, thank you for that, Dan. And lastly, Emily, if you want to unmute yourself and state your comment or question.
Hi, I'm Emily. I live near Sarah, so I'm right at the end of Chesapeake, right by Riverview Park. So I really appreciate Jim's comment about thinking about the ways that this bridge will impact the neighborhood, but in the park, and sort of more holistically, like thinking about all the ways that people use our park, not just for riding bikes and walking. But my comment is actually, I really appreciate people posting the feasibility study. And my question is about this sort of Presidio development that's featured on some of these slides. I'm wondering if that's commercial or residential, and we haven't at all talked about, like, it's part of the feasibility study, but we haven't at all talked about what it is. So just like, if somebody knows, they can share.
Yeah, Emily, I will let Dan speak to that a little bit more, but my understanding is briefly it is a commercial development. We didn't really talk about what it is in particular because it comes into the project as, a property that would need to be. Oh, and I see Tim is also noting that he can chime in. So Dan, we'll let you answer, and then Tim.
Well, I'm going to pass it to Tim. He worked on this project, and go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the Presidio Apartments project is just residential. It's 150 apartment units. That was kind of zoned, I think, a number of years ago as part of the overall Peter Jefferson Place redevelopment and rezoning that, brought Martha Jefferson Hospital there and other development. But that particular parcel will just be residential only. I do want to mention that the developer of that project, Riverbend Development, did donate about 7 acres of land to the county as part of their development plan. I guess I should say they reserved 7 acres, and the county can, request that it formally be dedicated. But that is kind of a relevant detail in the sense that there wouldn't be any acquisition costs or time or additional effort in that regard for any sort of trail connection or other open space connectivity or amenities on that 7 acres, because they've already made that commitment to the public benefit.
Thanks for clarifying. It being residential makes me feel a little bit better than it being commercial.
Yeah, and I think just if I can tack on, I know we're over time, but earlier we were talking about vehicular access and parking. I will say that the Riverbend development team and county staff from Parks and Recreation, community development, planning, zoning, engineering, we're working closely on how that, you know, potential dedication of land could include some type of trailhead amenity, parking lot, vehicular access. And we turned over a lot of rocks, figuratively, trying to figure out what could work. And like many of the other sites on Pantops there on State Farm Boulevard and Peter Jefferson Parkway and South Pantops Boulevard, it's just very tough from a topography standpoint and from a property ownership standpoint. So I just wanted to circle back to that important topic that parking and vehicular access is important, but it's something that's been that we've been trying to work on, you know, above and beyond this particular bridge feasibility study. And you know, it should be a component of the bridge if it does move forward. But as others have commented, you know, the value in the bridge is also about recreation and commuter connectivity. And so we wouldn't want to think of vehicular access being the primary or predominant way that the bridge is necessarily going to be accessed. Having said all that, we definitely see the importance of having parking and vehicular access to the Rivanna River in that area, not only for the bridge, but for the Old Mills Trail and just general access down to the river valley. So hope that's helpful context.
This is Chris. Can y'all hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you, Chris.
Tim and everybody else, I just saw the news today that possibly because of COVID, but for long-term planning, State Farm is looking at more of their workers telecommuting and reconsidering their offices nationwide. It may be worth connecting with your contacts at State Farm to see if any of that existing parking may or may not be in the next couple of years something you could talk to State Farm about, just as they look at their overall business strategy with telecommuting. I just saw the news today, so it's worth looking at.
Yeah, that's really pertinent, Chris. And I know the county's economic development office has started to have some, you know, private discussions with State Farm. I don't know what the status of those are, but just wanting to understand the importance of, you know, their private property and having a high degree of sensitivity to, you know, talking about the potential future use of their land. It's obviously a great opportunity, but it's something that our economic development office has kind of been leading to this point.
Yeah, that's similar to Willow Tree. They made this great big new office, so then everybody's telecommuting now. So the world changed in the last 9 months. It's kind of interesting to look at how that might change our view of things too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Chris, for those comments. And thank you to all of our attendees for all of your great comments and questions. Like I said, if your questions remain unanswered, please email us. Dominique, if you move to the next slide, that'll show everyone's contact info, so people can jot that down. We'll also try to add information and respond to common questions on our website, the TJPDC website. So that concludes our meeting. Thanks for sticking with us. Dan, Chuck, or Chris, as my initial panelists, did you want to make any additional comments before we close out?
This is Chris. Just that I want to go to the International Bike Pedestrian Bridge Conference in Madrid with Jim next time they have it. That sounds super fun.
This is Dan. Just want to encourage everyone to make sure they give us their feedback. It's really important to get that involved in this process and, evaluate all the comments and be able to see what next steps are.
And Chuck, anything from you?
Yeah, I'd like to ditto Dan's comments. I appreciate everybody's attendance, and I would encourage you to provide your feedback so that we can make a decision on what we want to do at this location for the community, and try to get something that everybody will be a place for everybody to go to, and then provide that access across the river that currently is not there. So for most other alternative modes of transportation, bikes and pedestrians. So thank you again for everybody's participation.
Great. Well, thanks again to my panelists, and thanks again to attendees. We're going to end the meeting now and follow up with your feedback.